The Yankees battle Baltimore. Saturday night at 7:30 on Channel 11.
The following program was recorded earlier this evening.
Tonight at the Summit, point and counterpoint, what they signed and what's at stake. Barbara and Raisa at Wellesley, a standing ovation. And Total Recall, a sci-fi success or a total failure?
Who the hell am I?
From the Independent News in New York City, this is USA Tonight with Brad Holbrook and Sheila Steinbach.
Good evening. Sheila has the night off. They still have another day yet to talk, but the presidents of the world's two superpowers have made some historic announcements already. Mr. Bush and Mr. Gorbachev laying the foundation for a landmark treaty for the first ever cuts in strategic nuclear missiles, and they've signed a treaty on chemical weapons. We get more on the summit from John Aubuchon in Washington.
Summit problems were papered over for a while tonight as the Gorbachevs had the Bushes over to dinner.
To the happiness of our children and grandchildren.
But this was the centerpiece at the White House before dinner, a high-profile signing ceremony for a big handful of agreements and joint statements. They promised each other they'll sign a long-range missile treaty by year's end, a 30% cut in strategic warheads.
Major agreed provisions of a strategic arms reduction treaty, as well as a joint statement in which we agree to future negotiations on nuclear and space arms designed to enhance stability and reduce the risk of war.
То первое испытание мы выдержали.
Mr. President, I am pleased to note that the turbulent developments of recent months after Malta have not led us astray from the goal we set together. So I believe that we have passed the first test.
Some of the other papers signed on nuclear testing, on chemical weapons, each side to destroy almost all of its stockpiles, and a major prize for Gorbachev, a comprehensive trade agreement, and a long-term U.S. grain sales deal. Gorbachev had pushed hard for the trade accord, which will lead to most favored nation status, lower tariffs for the Soviets. President Bush had resisted signing, mostly because of Lithuania, and that drew some bitterness from Gorbachev this morning, reminding congressional leaders that just last week, Mr. Bush extended those trade breaks for China.
You have now given the MFN treatment to China after Tiananmen and Peking. What shall we do? What should we do for you to give us MFN? Maybe we should introduce presidential rule in the Baltic and at least fire some rounds in the Baltic.
And if that wasn't pointed enough,
why do you allow, for example, your own government, your own administration to invade Panama, which is a sovereign country, if you love freedom so much?
But President Gorbachev did find something he liked a lot: pressing the flesh with Americans on the street. The crowds went crazy. 3 times today, the Soviet leader drove his security officers to ulcers, stopping, plunging into crowds. The polls say he's more popular here than at home, so he has to love being mobbed by admirers. There seemed to be some mutual admiration at work in the meetings, too, mutual respect at least, and a very good working relationship. The going got tough at times today. In fact, for a while, it looked as though the missile deal might not be ready for tonight. But they worked it out, sidestepping a few arguments.
Whether it is just important or very important, that will be decided tomorrow.
And Gorbachev already has gotten something he can crow about back home, the trade agreement. President Bush has called his full day of private talks with Gorbachev at Camp David tomorrow the most important part of this summit. Obviously, he hopes the two of them alone can unstick some of the remaining hard issues. But he's also hoping that away from this formal atmosphere, what they say to each other can be less formal and perhaps more productive. John Aubuchon at the White House.
And with Gorbachev here in the United States, his rival, the newly elected president of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, is stirring things up in Moscow. After a meeting with the president of Lithuania, Yeltsin announced that he would try to foster closer ties with Russia to the Baltic Republic, perhaps leading to providing supplies that Gorbachev has cut off to Lithuania in his economic blockade. The First Ladies of the United States and the Soviet Union continue a summit of their own. Raisa Gorbachev accompanying Barbara Bush to commencement ceremonies at Wellesley College today. Here's Tim Malloy.
Where Nancy Reagan's relationship with Raisa Gorbachev appeared to be frosty and competitive, First Lady Barbara Bush and the Soviet First Lady seemed to get along famously. The backdrop for Mrs. Bush today was a difficult one. She was not the first choice as commencement speaker at Wellesley College, and many challenged her to take a definitive and vocal stand on women's rights and abortion. Mrs. Bush did manage to break the ice with her opening remarks.
Now, I know your first choice today was Alice Walker. Guess how I know. Known for the color purple, instead you got me. Known for the color of my hair.
Barbara Bush, a college dropout, invited Raisa Gorbachev, who holds a doctorate in philosophy, to share the stage with her and contribute to the commencement address. Mrs. Bush's speech was feisty and humorous. Mrs. Gorbachev, serious and instructive.
We, women, have our special mission. Always, even in the most cruel and troubled times, women have had the mission of peacemaking, humanism, mercy, and kindness.
About 150 of the 575 graduating seniors signed a petition and wore armbands protesting Mrs. Bush's selection. But much of the ceremony was marked by warm applause and, once in a while, a hearty laugh.
Who knows? Somewhere out in this audience may even be someone who will one day follow in my footsteps and preside over the White House as the president's spouse. And I wish him well.
This is Tim Malloy.
Still ahead tonight, the question of German unity. Mr. Gorbachev has a new proposal about that. And another fire breaks out on that cruise ship that ran aground this week.
USA Tonight, brought to you by AT&T, by Taster's Choice, and by Kellogg's Muesli.